Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for Venture Houston 2023, hosted by HX Venture Fund.
Welcome back, everybody. Again, delighted you're here and really grateful that we're having such a great event, great networking. Well, the last sessions were going on, I walked out for a moment and there were about 200 people out there networking, which is great. Obviously, we'd love to have everybody in the audience, but great, as Sandy mentioned at the beginning, great capital connections are occurring, and that's just the magic of it all. It is my distinct privilege to introduce to you the next panel. And I'm going to start first with our moderator, and if you will continue here, that'll be great. Bobby Tudor. Bobby is a very successful businessman. He was the founder of Tudor Pickering. Many of you have heard of their significant expertise in energy and energy transition. Well recognized. He retired from Tudor Pickering and has now started Artemis Partners, and is the chief executive officer. He's also leading the Houston Energy Transition Initiative on behalf of the Greater Houston Partnership. He was former chairman of the board of the Greater Houston Partnership and also on the Rice University Board of Trustees. Bobby, delighted you're here with us. Next is Trevor Best, one of our favorite entrepreneurs who's made us very proud with Syzygy Plasmonics. For those of you who know what that term means, it actually means three aligned vectors, or three aligned celestial bodies in a row. And the company was named because it stands for those three issues: energy, technology, and sustainability. Very clever name. The company uses electric reactors using light instead of combustion to generate power. It's a fascinating story. And real quick, I gave Trevor heads up. I happened to attend a pretty significant global conference of energy transition investors in New York City recently. And there were people all over the world who were attending, from Asia, Europe, you name it. Hard to get into, and many of the most prestigious institutional investors in the United States. And Trevor was presenting. One of the general partners of that fund asked him, well, Trevor, tell us the story about what it was like to start a company in Houston, Texas in 2016 or thereabouts. And Trevor told the story. And the first part was fascinating to me, but of great concern. And I'll stop the story there because later on in this conversation, I know that he's going to share with us the latter part. And it has a very good ending, and that's just a little bit of a teaser for you. And then last but not least is Aaron Ledet, Vice President with LyondellBasell, a global $50 billion revenue chemicals company that many of you know. LyondellBasell is one of our highly esteemed limited partners. They've been with us from day zero, have been re-upped from Fund 1 to Fund 2. They're heavily engaged in the methodology, and the whole team and the top leadership very engaged in making all this successful. And so we're very proud to have LyondellBasell as limited partners. Welcome, Aaron, as well. And then I have to apologize because our very dear Kristen Ellis from Lower Carbon Capital, who would undoubtedly have made this panel very spicy, is not able to attend today. She got COVID and was not able to travel. She sends her regrets. Many of you know Kristen, and you know what I mean when I say she would have made this spicy, but hopefully in the future we will have her here as well. Now, with that said, I will pass it on to you, Bobby. Please help me welcome them.
Great, thank you. So good morning, and thanks everyone for being here. We've got an interesting panel here this morning because we're kind of coming at it from two very different angles. And Trevor, we have someone who has really walked the startup journey, has worked with venture capital, has raised raised money and has worked to take technology truly from a university lab to commerciality, kind of the standard venture capital story, and one that's very inspirational for all of us working in this space. We also have in Aaron, LyondellBasell, a huge company, very capital-intensive business, process engineering driven business, accustomed to huge capital outlays, huge dollars, and the challenges associated with scaling product and scaling technologies. Both of these pieces are really important components of the energy transition and of climate tech work. And so I think we'll have an interesting conversation and get probably two very different perspectives given that dichotomy, if you will. So Trevor, let's start with you and Syzygy. Just give the group here kind of the 3-minute thumbnail version of the company, how you've kind of gotten from the university lab to where you are today, just to level set for all of us.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Bobby. Happy to be here. So our journey with Syzygy starts back in 2016. My co-founder, Dr. Suman Kadiwada, and I, we had been doing R&D work inside Baker Hughes for many years, and we started a technology search. We found a paper from Rice University at the end of 2016, and thought it was interesting. Went and met the two professors, Professor Hollis and Nordlander, and started digging into this plasmonic photocatalyst technology. And what we found was truly astonishing. We found a platform technology that was dramatically outperforming any of the catalysts in industry at the time. We're talking like 15 to 30x improvement in some of the fundamental catalyst metrics like catalyst activity. We got very excited. We started a diligence process where we were trying to find some way to break the technology, trying to kill the idea so that we could get on to the next one. But it just would not die. And everything we dug into, just showed us that there was truly something there. It was low cost, easy to make. The metrics were incredible. The platform nature of it allowed it to be broadly applied across the whole chemical industry. So we decided to quit our jobs and go in full time in 2017. What we saw at that time was that even though the catalyst was working great, no one had ever made a reactor to drive a catalyst with light instead of heat from combustion. And so the whole development of Syzygy has been to create this light-driven reactor and bring this technology to commercial scale. It has been a very interesting ride for the past 6 or 7 years. We have seen this ecosystem in Houston completely transform, and it's something I'd love to talk about more in this panel, from the pre-energy transition days to where we are today. And ultimately, we have been developing the technology and are at the point where we have turned it into a commercial product. And I'm happy to announce that we installed our full industrial size reactor into our test bay yesterday. And we will begin testing at industrial scales in the immediate future. And so, thank you. It has been an absolute hell of a ride, and the technology is now ready for Aaron to come buy some. So.
Awesome, and congratulations. It's just a fantastic story all the way around. Aaron, tell us a little bit just about LyondellBasell, your company, how it thinks about the broader issue of sustainability and climate commitments that your company has made,
Sure.
et cetera, to level set us all.
Yeah, appreciate the question, Bobby. Thanks. And I'm glad to be here today. It's a great turnout. I'm not sure how many of you follow LyondellBasell, but we made a very public commitment about our greenhouse gas ambitions here within the past 12 months. We've got a new CEO on board, Peter Vanacker. Our prior ambition was to achieve a 30% reduction in our greenhouse gas footprint by 2030 and net zero by 2050. We've since upped that to 42% by 2030 and still net zero by 2050. What does that really mean for us in terms of the size and scale of our assets? If you think about a ton of emissions for our company, you look at our sustainability report, about 23 million tons a year of emissions. It's a hard to abate industry. You've probably seen that as well. On average, it's about $1,000 a ton to abate the emission footprint. So if you think about our total emissions of 23 million tons, based on a baseline of 2020, could be as much as $23 billion between now and 2050 to achieve that goal. And if you think about a company like ours, the way we approach capital and capital allocation, we typically fund all of our projects from cash flow from operations. And it's not just capital projects, but also our dividends. So both of those components are competing for the amount of cash flow that we're generating on a regular basis. Again, as Bobby said, we're a global company. We have multiple business units. But if you think of the largest assets that we have, they really sit in my business area, the Olefins and the Polyolefins segment, specifically the Olefins furnaces. So we have quite a few projects already underway. We've obviously got obligations to our shareholders to deliver profitable projects. We're not going to do it just to do it. And I am glad to say that we've already identified 36% of our footprint that we can abate by 2030, and we're closing the gap on that 42%. So really excited about that.
Fantastic. So we have here a venture-backed startup company, really important part of the ecosystem. We have a big industrial company, the kind of place that can run pilots and buy product and encourage the Syzygys of the world. So let's talk a little bit more about the ecosystem, the important components of the ecosystem. Trevor, you touched on this earlier. Maybe a good place to start would be with the connectivity between our research universities and the kind of research footprint with startups and with entrepreneurs. Tell us a little bit about your experience with that. It is obviously quite direct, and help us maybe kind of level set that part of the ecosystem.
Yeah, so I'm sure many of you in the audience are familiar with like the startup valleys of death. There's a couple of them. It really begins, bringing the technology out of university and supporting that. So when you first find a technology in a university and you perform an initial assessment and you find out that there is something interesting, happy there, it is like a toddler, an infant. It needs to be, nurtured. And when we first started Syzygy, there was not a lot of infrastructure in the city to nurture our kind of technology. So our first step out of the university, we worked with Rice OTT and licensed the technology. And if we want to go down that pathway, Bobby, happy to talk about what licensing tech from university looks like. But our first step out of the university was into a friend's laboratory. It was a company called Nanospectra, and beyond the shadow of a doubt, they saved our life. Without them, there would probably be no Syzygy today. They did cancer research, and so there was we called it the mouse house. There's a room next to our test setup that was filled with mice that they were testing cancer drugs on. And our lab setup was in the warehouse right outside the door, and it was not well lit. We rented the back corner of their warehouse and built our first test setup. And that was, how we started the company. It's very, very bare bones. Since then, since late 2017 and 2018, the ecosystem has started to grow some really fundamental pieces to support that initial fledgling toddler stage of company. And this is through resources that you see at groups like Greentown Labs. So for those of you who are in Houston visiting, you should definitely make a point to stop by Greentown Labs. They are building out the infrastructure to help early stage companies test their technology outside of the university. Also, the ION is helping to bring companies out and incubate them. Halliburton Labs. These kinds of facilities are absolutely critical. Houston was also missing another very important piece of that ecosystem at the time around investment. And so in the very early days, there were not many funds, especially clean tech funds, paying attention to this city. And that has changed as well with, groups like HX, doing Venture Houston, bringing all of you here to come start seeing what's happening in Houston. It has been a almost renaissance over the past 6 years. So between Greentown, the Ion, HX, we have been bringing capital into the city and posting some very impressive numbers over the years. And these pieces are critical to taking early stage technologies out of the university and getting them to grow. I think that Houston is standing at a tipping point where we are now starting to hit critical mass of people paying attention to the city, of infrastructure required, and of interesting ideas coming out of the universities that I think Houston is really going to start putting itself on the map for doing this in the future. And so for all of you that are coming to visit, get ready, because you're going to see a whole lot more companies like Syzygy coming out of this ecosystem in the coming years. It's a bit of a meandering answer.
That's great. That's awesome and helpful. So Aaron, one of the things we pitch to venture capital firms and entrepreneurs around why they should be in Houston, they should invest in Houston, is that we have a big industrial base here.
Sure.
We have 25 Fortune 500 companies in Houston, of which 19 come from the energy and petrochemical sector. There's no concentration like that really anywhere in the world. But that's only meaningful if we can get that industrial base connected to our entrepreneurial community and our early stage firms. How does a big company like Lyondell think about that issue?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I try to simplify things for our approach. If you think about our ambition today in that 42%, there's really only a handful of areas that we can go after to really reduce our footprint in a meaningful way. One of those is just around energy efficiency, right? Doing more with less, and those are typically no regret type projects. Another is around electrifying your assets. In order to electrify your assets, you're going to need some source of renewable power. You heard in the previous panel, there's plenty of renewable power ideas out there. That could be one connection that we would make. Because in a company like ours, while we may have 20,000 people, we do have limited budgets. We are a very large company. It does take a lot of time to innovate and grow. We typically rely on an audience like this to move a little bit quicker than we can move. So I talk about electrifying equipment. The other is about fuel switching. You've seen a lot of news lately of hydrogen as a fuel source. That idea is not new, but there's a lot of investment out there around producing hydrogen in an economical way that industrials like us can consume as a fuel source to then displace natural gas. We're getting ideas from that space. I mean, we're on both ends of the spectrum now. Trevor's developing the idea to produce the hydrogen, and eventually we'll be there to consume it. And then finally, the last area that we would invest would be around carbon capture and sequestration. Those are really the main areas that we would look to. And you can see some interdependencies with smaller, more nimble firms that can make that investment, focus on the innovation, and scale it. If you think about our assets, we've talked about our footprint and how much it would be to abate our entire footprint. You're talking about billions of dollars of investment. And in the previous panel, they talked about failing fast. Yes, we would like to fail fast, but when you're talking about hundreds of millions to billions of dollars, you don't want to fail at all, because that's a tremendous bump in the road for a company like ours. So we have our circularity business, which much more nimble, much quicker in terms of failing fast, but in one of our core businesses like mine, you do not want to fail in a large way.
Another important component of our ecosystem is talent and technical talent. And similarly, we pitch that here in Houston, we have a really unusual sort of core of technically trained talent, whether it's skilled labor or high-end technical talent. That's obviously important to a startup, and it's important to big companies. Let's talk about the talent issue for a moment, and Trevor, give us a feel for how you guys think about that at Syzygy, where you source your talent, where there appear to be kind of pockets of resistance or shortage, and then I'll ask you the same question, Aaron.
Yeah, and I'll answer talent 1 second. I can't help the opportunity for a selfless plug for the company. Aaron mentioned a bunch of things. He mentioned energy efficiency, and Syzygy has a reactor that is operating more efficiently than the reactors in the field. He mentioned electrification. Our reactor runs using renewable electricity. He mentioned fuel switching. We make hydrogen, and he mentioned CO2. And we have our platform tech has pathways for CO2 utilization. So it was just kind of amazing to hear, 4 check boxes for why Syzygy exists, validated from the big guys. But talking back to talent, how we've been able to grow this tech and check those boxes that I just mentioned was by the amazing people that we have. I have the easiest job in the company. I'm a storyteller. I get up here and I smile a lot and say pretty things, but it is my employees that actually develop the technology. And my job is really easy when they make the reactor work as well as they have. And I think that being here in Houston has been a critical piece of developing that employee base. At no point in the company's history